thank you all for being here. I really mean that. It means the world to me that you would give up the time to come out and be part of this democracy that we really are all responsible for. So what this crowd does for me is confirm something that I've been thinking for a little bit over the past year. When I set out to run for Congress the first time, there was a lot of things that I heard in the media as well, which is that our country was too divided at this point. People were in these different camps. Our institutions were too old and too slow to respond to the challenges that we have in modern life today, and that's why everybody is so upset and angry, and our politics just can't work anymore. But the more and more I went around, and I sort of had the unique privilege of campaigning in 2 different districts in the same year, so I got a chance to talk to a lot of people out there. People still believe in this system that we've set up. We call it the American experiment for a reason, right? Because we were the first to do it. We designed a system of separate institutions sharing power at the local, state, and federal level to get people involved, and it relies on people becoming involved, right? It starts to fail when too few people control too much power. And so we try to refresh it with new life and new energy every couple of generations. We could probably use a little bit more of that right now, I would say, in Washington, D.C. But I'm happy that you gave me the chance to become part of that for my generation and for the challenges that lay ahead. And the fact that people are willing to come out here and ask questions and tell me what they think just shows that we can't make these institutions work again. We're going to have to fight hard for it, the way that our ancestors did. And some of you might have to push me on issues where we maybe don't agree right now, or I don't know as much as you, and that's why we have these, because I work for you. I understand that, and I think about it every single day. Every day that I walk onto the floor of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., I know that I'm there to represent you, that that's my job. And so that's why we have these. I appreciate you helping me do that tonight. The one rule is this. You can say whatever you want to me. Like I said, I work for you. I understand that. Please don't talk to each other, at least not openly during the session. So don't argue with each other. Don't comment on each other's questions. Just keep it coming this way, and I mean it. If you have to get something off your chest, go for it. I can take it. I heard it all in the Marines, trust me. And I heard it all from my parents before then, so don't worry about it, all right? With that, I just kind of wanted to address maybe a couple of quick topics to tell you some things we've been working on. So as you can tell, I'm a believer in the way things are supposed to work in our government. I think we've got the best Constitution there is, and if we follow it, we'll probably be okay. And as ugly as it was the past couple of weeks when we were trying to avoid another government shutdown, and we a lot of people sort of competing for airtime down there with different ideas, wall, no wall, it seemed like it was impossible to compromise. What actually happened in the end was the bipartisan compromise that people say they want to see. I mean, ultimately what happened was we got senators and representatives of both parties in a room together for a couple weeks. They brought in some experts. They hashed out the details. They came up with a deal that not everybody was thrilled about, but a lot of people voted for. I was standing in the House when that deal got 300 votes. Plenty of Democrats, plenty of Republicans. There are very few things that passed the House by that large a margin. We got together on this and we passed something that means we'll spend the money on the barriers and the technology and everything else for the rest of the year. We don't have to worry about another shutdown. So the emergency declaration aside, I'm sure some people are going to ask about that. It'll be worked out in the courts, but I want everyone to take a moment and just recognize that our system actually worked the way it's supposed to, and it shows that that original vision that the founders had actually endures. Congress does control the power of the purse, and when the pressure from the citizens is strong enough, we will occasionally do our job the right way. So hopefully we won't make it so hard again next time, and maybe we've all learned something from this episode that'll help us going forward. The other thing I wanted to mention was one specific policy that I've been working on. So everywhere I went last year, I heard about a couple of things over and over again. One of them was Social Security, and the fact that people think it's unfair that Social Security has been underfunded, that lawmakers have borrowed from the trust fund or done whatever they did when they paid into it their whole working lives. And I met people who started work at age 12. One guy I'll never forget, he started work at age 12 and was paying Social Security from then to the day I met him when he was 77. He was collecting, but he was still working so much that he was actually still paying taxes on his Social Security too. He was working at his church after all these years because he had to pay for supplemental medical coverage like everybody else does. And so one of the first things I did when I got to Washington was I tried to find out, how can I help strengthen Social Security? Well, there's a bunch of us who are now pushing a bill called Social Security 2100. And we call it that because we want to guarantee Social Security through the year 2100. For you, for your kids, for their kids. And we can do that. You know, I know politicians have been saying for years that we were going to have to do entitlement reform, right? They talk about Social Security like it's some kind of welfare program, even though it's your money. That's not what it is. It's an insurance policy. You've been paying all that money all those years like an insurance premium to be there for when you really need it. And it will be there when you really need it. We're going to pass this bill, and what that means is that for about the top 1% of wage earners in our country, people who earn over $400,000 a year, they're going to start paying a little more into Social Security than they were before. Because right now, we only tax, I haven't even got to the best part yet. We only tax your paycheck for Social Security up to about your first $130,000, which covers a lot of people. But if you're a millionaire in the United States, you know what day you stop paying Social Security for the rest of the year? Valentine's Day. We're already past it. If you're making $1 million, you're already done paying Social Security for the year 2019. For a system that's under strain, that a lot of people have worked really hard to preserve, that's not good enough. We can ask those folks to pay a little bit more. And so what we've done is we've carved out a window from that $130,000 to about $400,000. You're not paying anything additional. But if you make above $400,000, you're going to start paying a little bit more. And if you're my age, you're going to start paying about 50 cents a week more. And if we don't do those two things, if you're collecting Social Security right now, how many people in this room are collecting Social Security already? Your checks are going to get bigger. You're going to get a cost of living increase, and you're going to get a benefits increase in a significant way that hasn't happened in far too long. And it will be there in the year 2100. So that's what I'm really working on, is trying to get people to sign on to vote for that. We already have over 200 members of the House who say they'll vote for it. We will pass it, and then we'll try to work on it over in the Senate and take it from there. So that's my update. I would love it if people have questions, if they have things they want me to know, if they have problems they've run into with our government, stories they want me to know, you know, just...
Congressman.
Okay.
Hold on, wait a minute. Okay. Anybody that has a cell phone, put it on silent. I did not do that. That was my phone that rang in the back. We don't need to do that anymore.
Okay,
Thank you.
The way that we're going to work, I see we got one person who's really dying to ask questions, so you are going to be first, sir. And then after that, I have a couple staff members who are going to basically rotate around and kind of pick out who they see. So if you signal my friend DJ here in the suit, or Marcy, who's also on my staff, if you signal them, they'll make sure they get around to you, and then we'll work it that way, okay? Sir, please.
Okay, Congressman, maybe this, I thought Mr. Matthew would be here, but what, if any, and when will smoking be abolished in the state of Pennsylvania or the Commonwealth? And when? And what?
Starting off with the easy ones. All right.
I think that's a tough one. I think a lot of our people here, that I'm a member with the American Legion here, the clubs and bars need to know this, in the membership. Everybody needs to know this. So what, if any, and I'm sure it's on the back burner somewhere in the Commonwealth, will smoking be abolished in the state?
I'm not aware of any efforts to abolish smoking in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania or at the federal level where I work.
I thought maybe Mr. Massey would have been here to answer that.
I can make sure I ask him the next time I see him.
Yes, I think, you know, our people in, you know, organizations like this one here and others would like to, you know, be aware of that, you know.
Sure.
Would like to know.
Sure.
Okay.
And I'm remiss, you know, I just want everyone to know how kind and generous it is for the folks here at the American Legion to allow us to use this space tonight and to host us. You saw them scrambling for extra chairs because you all were good enough to come out. So just real quick, a big hand for all of us.
I wish to speak.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, thank you for taking my question. Representative Lamb, we want to know if you're going to support and represent the lawful gun owners of the newly formed 17th Legislative District against big blowhard mayors like the one from Pittsburgh. This individual and his council members seek to ban our guns and nullify our Second Amendment rights. The state law and federal law clearly states no county, municipality, or township may in any manner regulate the lawful ownership, possession, transfer, or transportation of firearms, ammunition, or ammunition components when carried or transported for purposes not prohibited by the laws of this Commonwealth. But the Pittsburgh mayor and his council members' ignorance of this law is only surpassed by their arrogance of this law. Now, Representative Lamb, specifically, what will you do to rein in the politicians who think they can make ordinance that disregards state and federal law? First question.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I am focused on federal law because that's my job. So as I talked about, I really value the constitutional system that we set up. So we do have people in the city of Pittsburgh, which I do not represent, who are trying to pass certain laws that I guess are going to be challenged in the state courts from the beginning, and they're going to hash that out. You know, those efforts have not been real successful by our cities in the past. We'll see what happens. What I can tell you is on the federal level, we take the Second Amendment extremely seriously. We take public safety extremely seriously. And we all believe that we can balance those two things. I respect the rights of every lawful gun owner, and I have been told time and time and again by gun owners that they value the system of background checks that we have set up. They want to see it work right so that the people who want to commit crimes and get guns illegally when they shouldn't have them, which are the majority of crimes that I encountered as a prosecutor, was people who got their guns illegally. They want to see us enforce that better, and so that's what I'm focused on doing.
Okay, I'll continue. We must have this.
How about we do this? How about we go around and make sure everyone gets one question in, and then if we have time at the end, we'll come back to the rest.
Fair enough.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, go ahead.
Take the floor.
My name's Roger Thomas, and everything that she's told you about me is true. Okay, I got two things I want to comment on. You've got an employee in your staff by the name of Fiona. I want you to give that woman a raise. She does everything, and she does it promptly, and she does it correctly, and that's the very kind of employee we want representing us.
We're talking about Connie.
Okay, give that woman a raise.
I would love to.
Okay.
Thank you for saying that.
Second item of business, you've been appointed to, and I don't have the name right, but you've been appointed to the Committee on Energy. Okay, what's the correct name of that?
It's the Energy Subcommittee of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology.
All right, do your job. Okay, we've got too much fossil fuel in the air right now. Do your job. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Good.
No, I'm okay.
I think we're good.
She answered my question.
Okay.
Sidebar.
Sometimes it really is better to just ask
you
the
got
staff.
to
They know
staff.
quite a lot. So, did you have your hand up, ma'am?
Yeah, I did, and so, I don't know, I was wondering if you could speak to, because I don't know that much about it, but just happened to read an article that concerned me this morning in the New York Times about what Betsy DeVos is doing in the Department of Education. Unreined, it appears to be, with the money.
Connor, give her the mic.
Yeah, no, you can't.
I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it. So
Yeah,
everyone's
just
here.
if you could speak to it and what is being done, because she is in the midst of repealing regulations and quality assurances for where the money for the Veterans Administration goes towards colleges and universities for our vets that are appropriate, not these these for-profit institutions that are in some cases giving out bogus degrees as well as bankrupting our veterans, and it really concerned me that
Absolutely.
What's the oversight?
Yeah, so the question is about Secretary DeVos at the Department of Education and what they're doing basically to oversee some of these predatory institutions that are out there going after veterans. And I can tell you, a lot of the veterans in the room tonight will understand this, but for-profit educational institutions, car dealerships, payday lenders, that sort of whole category of places, they know that active duty military folks get a regular paycheck, and they know that people leaving active duty in the military are probably eligible for the GI Bill, which they look at and see dollar signs, right? So some of these for-profit schools have very, very aggressive marketing tactics to young folks leaving active duty. And some of these people might be 22, 23 years old, maybe haven't had a chance to have higher education yet and are looking at using their GI Bill to get ahead. And if they're leaving active duty far from home and they don't have maybe their parents around or someone like that to give them advice, if the only person they meet is a recruiter from a for-profit school that makes them a bunch of promises about the kind of job that they're going to get, about how quickly they can complete their degree, about exactly what the costs are, and whether the GI Bill covers it, because the GI Bill doesn't always cover everything, and people end up deeper in debt than they thought. Just like anything else, you want to have some basic safeguards in place, right? You want to have a cop on the beat to make sure that these really wealthy, aggressive institutions aren't tricking our veterans and taking their money and not getting them the degree or the training that they promised. So we've always had programs in place in the Department of Education to basically oversee that and to regulate it and to prosecute people that break the rules. Unfortunately, under the Secretary, we have seen loosening of many of those protections, and we have seen a lack of investment at the time when we really need it the most. And so that's one of the concerns that we have about her, is that she has loosened the reins, and many of us would like to see that tightened. I sit on the Committee on Veterans Affairs in the House of Representatives, and I can tell you we'll be taking a very close look at how all this is done. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Baden, and I live in Allegheny County, and I'm one of your new constituents. I guess we became part of your district. And I'm here today because I am a representative of the National Kidney Foundation and the American Association of Kidney Patients. My son graduated from Penn State University, and he graduated in 2013, and 2 weeks after he graduated, he got real high blood pressure. And he was a student athlete at Penn State. He played baseball, good kid. His intent was to come and work in our insurance business. Well, it didn't work that way. He ended up in the hospital, and he nearly died. And the doctor said, well, because you're so athletic, we feel that your kidney function, even though it's impaired now, will come back. Well, that was in May, and by the time October came around, he had no kidney function left. That visit with the doctor was, okay, you're in kidney failure, you need to start dialysis, and not only do you need to find a living donor, not only do you need to find a donor, but you need to find a living donor. And we were in a real predicament because he never worked a day in his life. He played baseball and he went to school. So ultimately he ended up going on Medicare, dialysis and everything, and I was his support person. And I searched high and low to find him a donor. And I actually did. We ran into many obstacles, and it's leading to my point why I want to alert, I'm educating you right now. We ran into a lot of obstacles because he was a young person, and even though the young people that he went to school with, those baseball team members, the brotherhood, so to speak, wanted to give him a kidney, they couldn't because of the risks that faced them. You know what I mean? Like not being able to be employed, not being able to have insurance, pre-existing conditions, or giving a kidney away, and not even in terms of like long-term care insurance or life insurance coverage to protect their families down the road. So what happened is through my advocacy efforts in social media and the good generosity of the Penn State Alumni Association putting, you never know who's looking, on social media and so forth, our need out there, a donor stepped forward from the state of New Jersey. He was 57 years old, and my son was 22 at the time. And he invited my son to a tailgate. Well, he went to Pittsburgh, got evaluated. They told him he was too fat. He went back to New Jersey. He lost 30 pounds. It took him 6 months. Came back to Pittsburgh.
People say bad things about people from New Jersey.
So he went back to New Jersey. He told his kid, who got kicked off the baseball team, by the way, after the first year he wasn't good enough, said, invite this kid to our tailgate party and this Saturday. And he says, okay, Dad, I will. So they went to the tailgate party at Penn State on September 12th, 2015, and my son stepped up to the girl and said, what can I get for you? And he goes, well, I'll take a breakfast sandwich. He says, is that all you want? And he said, yeah. He says, well, I thought you wanted a kidney. And he said, well, yeah, I do need a kidney. I need to get a kidney transplant. I have kidney failure. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm giving you my kidney. When do you want it? And on November 9th, 2015, he got a kidney from this man, from a complete stranger. And this if you ever take a major TV movie, you guys watch the Hallmark Channel, this should be like a movie from what we lived through. But that's the basis of my situation, and I am an advocate for kidney disease as a result of that. I supported my son throughout his journey of waiting to get a kidney transplant, which was over 2 years that he suffered on dialysis. And people on dialysis, it's not a really good quality of life. not needless to say, it can shorten your life. You know, the average person only lasts 5-6 years on dialysis and you die, you know. So, and that happens to a lot of people. And there are many, many people in your district and in Pennsylvania and across the country. Over 100,000 people right now in the country are waiting for kidney transplants. They're in kidney failure. So, my ask to you, and what I want to alert you on, there's 3 things. First of all, right now, just this week, there was legislation introduced to give living donors protection. The same rights that people have under FMLA, like if your wife has a baby, she can take time off from work and get herself situated, or like a spouse, and not have fears of losing their job, not have fears of being discriminated against for insurance purposes, and for long-term care and wages and so forth. That, in terms of cost, like what would it cost the government? A lot of times everything has to have a price tag attached to it. There is no cost. All it is putting the wording in there that gives them the same support or same protections that everybody else has, but giving the protections for people who donate organs. If that was in place for my son when he got out of school at the age of 22, we wouldn't have been faced waiting 2.5 years. We would have had our donor right off the bat, because these young people couldn't afford to do that. You know, they had to embark on their careers, and they had families and loans and responsibilities that they had to move forward on. Some 57-year-old man did that for them. So the second thing I want to ask you about is in reference to the immunosuppressant drugs. My son, for the rest of his life, will have to take anti-rejection medication to keep his kidney healthy. If he does not take that medicine, he will lose his kidney. He will have to go back on dialysis, and he may even die, okay? And that's the facts. As far as it goes, those immunosuppressant medications are very expensive. And right now, the current situation with Medicare, remember me mentioning he had to go on Medicare? They only cover for 36 months. My son's 36 months ended on November 30th, 2018. Right now, he was forced to go onto Medicaid, which is like the state welfare system, to get his medication, because we cannot afford to pay for these medications. They're thousands of dollars every month. So there needs to be some action taken on this to help people, young people like that. And the third thing that I wanted to ask you, it's like a 2-part thing. First of all, we need to raise more awareness of early detection of kidney disease, so that people, in my son's situation, they checked out, they went back through the NCAA. When you play baseball in athletics, you have to be cleared medically. Nothing surfaced. They don't understand why his blood pressure went so high the way it is. Nobody in our family has blood pressure issues, but it did. But early detection will help so many other people, and dialysis is really expensive. You know, it costs like $50,000 a month, to do dialysis. Compared to, like, if you can change your diet or detect kidney disease early, it's usually a very slow progressing disease. That seems to be a more cost-effective way to do that. And
what is your question?
The question is, I want to know what he's going to do and if he will support these things. The last thing is increased funding for research. There are appropriations for PCORI, the Patient Research Institute, is up this year. You're going to be asked to vote on it. I would ask that you would support that, so that it would help increase funding for people for research, so that we won't be in the situation that we're in today. Those 3 things, if you could address that.
Thank you very much. And that's exactly why we do this. So thank you for sharing all that and letting me know about it, because I don't get to hear about that issue in particular very often. So it's very, very meaningful that you just did that. We really appreciate it. A couple things in there, although I'm not an expert in kidney disease, I can say that I do know that since 2010, when we passed the Affordable Care Act, people with a pre-existing condition, which your son would be considered to have now, can no longer be barred from the insurance rolls or dropped from the insurance rolls. And that's a very significant development. Our healthcare system is far from perfect, but it's something that we need. The other area that I know is very, very important for us to take action on, and quick, is the price of these prescription drugs. Whether it's anti-rejection drugs or insulin that people take, or anything in between, the prices are going up and up and up across the board. It's unbelievable. And we really stand out in the world, and not the way we stand out for our Constitution. We stand out for the wrong reasons on this one. So just the other day, I talked to a lifelong medical researcher from Yale who developed his own cancer treatment and started his own company. He sold that treatment in 50 other countries around the world. And he said that in every single one, he had to negotiate directly with the government about what the price of that drug was going to be in their country. And they let him make a pretty good first price in his first year. And every single one of them mandated that every year after that, that price would fall between 2 and 10%. And so prices became more affordable in all of those countries over time rather than less. Here, it typically works in the opposite way. And we have nibbled around the edges of this problem without ever really fully addressing it. And it's because we've left our most powerful weapon completely unused. You know, the Medicare program that your son was enrolled in buys 1/3 of all prescription drugs in the country, at least, every single year. They are the biggest shopper in the market. And not only do we not use them, we have actually forbidden the Medicare program. We've written it into the law. We have forbidden them from negotiating directly with drug companies over the price of these drugs. And so these companies, which have twice as many lobbyists in Congress than there are in Washington than there are members of Congress, twice as many, we're outnumbered just by the drug lobby alone. They have done their job, and they've been allowed to earn more and more and more profit every year. So those are the couple of general issues that I'm definitely working on and continuing to try to improve. And we'll take a look at the specific research funding that you're talking about and make sure that we're able to come up with an answer on it. So if you follow up with us in a month or two, we'd be happy to talk more.
I'm going to come to Washington and see you in the first week of March with the National Kidney Foundation at the Kidney Patient Summit. We have a scheduling an appointment. I hope that I get to meet with you in person.
Fiona will make sure you get a good appointment, you know what I mean? So she's ready to check it. All right. Thank you. We're going back.
She just got a raise too.
Yeah. She's not getting it until she books your appointment.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna hold her to it.
Did you say you're on an energy committee of some sort?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does that include us being in the plastic belt here as far as basically the overview of the infrastructure that's going to be coming our way? Because one of the problems, you said that one of the great things about democracy is that you can, even the power between local government, state, and national. One of the things that I think is really being blindsided here is the local governments with the infrastructure of all this oil and gas development. A lot of these townships don't have the resources to understand what is going on. There's permits being put in places from the state that are really close to residents, places that no one really ever thought they were actually going to be placed. Pipelines everywhere. There's almost every week there's some kind of explosion or something gone wrong. And I just want to make you sure that you're aware of that, but also how do us as residents are we going to be able to protect ourselves, especially when we have local governments that don't really have the resources to get the right information?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for the question. And if anyone couldn't hear it on that side of the room, it mostly is about the ability of our local governments to make the right decision when it comes to the placement of pipelines and related infrastructure from natural gas development around here. That's been something I've been hearing a lot about in all different parts of Washington, Westmoreland, and Beaver County. The short answer is, if you live in one of these communities, you got to do stuff like this with your local government and make sure they understand what you think and how close you think those pipelines should be to schools and residences, because oftentimes I think the companies may beat you to the punch on that and get a pretty good deal worked out before the citizens have necessarily been heard. But more generally, what we have the ability to do in the federal government is to set some very important rules and standards on how all of this stuff gets built and then actually enforce them. And right now we do an okay job setting some standards. We do a very poor job of enforcing them. And so I can tell you, I mentioned I was a prosecutor here in Pittsburgh for about 3 years before I ran for Congress. One day I got a call from an agent who worked for the EPA. And he was coming out here to bust open a case on these companies in the natural gas industry that had rigged the required detectors on their trucks for certain levels of exhaust. These trucks emit a lot more exhaust and other fumes than normal ones do. And there's a rule that they have to have certain detectors on there basically to make sure that they're not emitting more than they're allowed to. And one of the companies figured out you could rig it in a certain way where they would save themselves money and the things wouldn't go off. And this EPA agent, God bless him, got wind of it. So he comes out, he's doing the case, I'm helping him get some warrants and that kind of thing. And I said, you know, I've been working here about 2.5 years, and I've never run into an agent from the EPA before. And I asked around my office because I wanted to make sure I was doing this particular kind of case right, and nobody else had run into him before either. And it turned out that was because he was stationed in Philadelphia. We didn't have any EPA enforcement agents on the criminal side here in Western Pennsylvania, despite the fact that we are, you know, for all equivalency, the Saudi Arabia of natural gas.
Yes.
And we didn't have the cop on the beat that I think many of you expected we would have.
Yes, yes,
We have
yes.
some in the State Department of DEP, but many of them have seen their budgets and staff cut by half in the same time that this natural gas activity has been increasing. So I want to be clear, I'm a supporter of the natural gas industry. I think it has changed the position of the United States in the world. We have become energy independent for the first time. We have started emitting less carbon as a country for the first time. Those are important achievements, but we have to make sure that this work is being done right. And that's the part where I think we're really failing, and I'll do everything I can to help in this position that I have on the Energy Subcommittee. So, sir, go ahead.
Dave Cranston from Swickley. I am a very strong proponent of life, and I've been very concerned about what's happened in New York and what happened in Virginia recently and other states that are doing that. And I know in the Senate, I believe, if not in the House, but I'd like to get your position on this. There is a bill to protect a baby after it's born. And so consequently, I'd like to get your position on life, and especially in this particular case, as far as that particular bill is concerned, if it happened to apply in House.
Sure thing, thank you. So the gentleman's question was about the issue of life, particularly as it relates to abortion. My position on that, I can tell you that overall, I'm a Catholic. I believe in and I follow what my church teaches. You know, I wouldn't want to have an abortion in my own family. That being said, I swore an oath to the Constitution, and I'm an American, and I believe in the separation of church and state. So where I come out is that I support a woman's right to choose. Now, I was as alarmed as you were by some of the things that were said in both New York and Virginia, and they really don't reflect my personal beliefs. I haven't seen the legislation that you're talking about in the Senate, and I have no idea if it will pass the Senate and come to the House. But I can promise you I'll take a careful look at it, and if you follow up with my office, we'll be sure to let you know. I can promise you that. We answer every phone call and letter, by the way, so when I say that today, I'm not just saying that to move on to the next thing. The woman that Roger mentioned, Fiona, who works in our Washington, D.C. office, makes sure that we answer every single letter that we receive. So you can certainly follow up and we'll get you an answer.
And she does it promptly.
I confirm what you just said.
He confirms what I just said, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. Ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up with Steve's comments about fracking, because more and more fracking wells are being built in Beaver County and the surrounding areas. The wells are being put in right next to residential areas. Fracking is an industrial process. It shouldn't be in residential areas. The problem is that a lot of the municipalities have outdated zoning, and I don't think they realize it. And so, for example, Steve lives in Economy Borough. He lives on a road called Amsler Ridge Road. It's a very steep, twisty, windy road. It has blind curves. So the local drilling company wants to use his residential neighborhood road as the access road to the well pad. And it's just totally dangerous. His residential road shouldn't be used as the access road to a well pad. All those trucks, the fracking trucks, the construction trucks, you know, to even have them on that road is just, it shouldn't even be considered, but the drilling company, you know, is pushing this through with the council. The council just seems to just be oblivious to, you know, the possibilities of trucks overturning, you know, kids are going to be trying to get on the school bus. So I just wanted to point out these things so that you're aware that to me, fracking is an industrial process, but it's encroaching closer and closer to residential neighborhoods. I know there's a 500-foot setback mandated by the state, but in my opinion, the setbacks need to be much farther back.
Thank you very much for sharing that, ma'am. I appreciate that. Who do we have next? Sir, go ahead.
Mike, how is Social Security underfunded, this $7 trillion surplus?
Right.
There's more to it, and also, is any of that surplus invested in anything? I know you can't put it in stock, but do they invest it in anything like T-bills or anything, or they just spend it all?
I don't think they spend it all. I think that it mostly sits in the Treasury. The issue is that, you know, we have the baby boom generation coming into retirement age at the same time that the workforce isn't necessarily large enough to support the size of that generation. So we're okay on Social Security right now, but people who look into the future on this thing see that we start to get into trouble in the 2030s and 40s if we don't do anything, and if the economy doesn't just sort of grow, you know, really largely on its own, which is not exactly what we expect. So that's why we have to take some measures now. It's a generational change. There's more people that are going to be collecting compared to how many there were before and the number of people that are working. Aaron, do you want to go next?
Yeah, first I want to thank you for always working on the healthcare stuff with me. I know I can be a bit of a nag. This one's kind of healthcare related, but it's actually more along the environmental stuff they were talking about. I didn't know where you were on the, it's called the Carbon Dividend Act. It's HR 7173. Are you familiar with it already, or?
I think it's been introduced by a couple of members of both parties, I believe.
Yeah, it's bipartisan. It's, you know, so far in terms of co-sponsorship.
Right.
But it sounds like it would actually protect American-made steel and aluminum and products like that. But it would also help to reduce the amount of carbon that we're emitting and the air pollution that I know a lot of us have been dealing with recently. I mean, you know Abby, my daughter, is medically complex, and she cannot go outside lately because when she does, she gets sick because the air's been so bad. I mean, this is like a right now issue, and I just didn't know where you were on that particular bill, or just in general all these environmental things that we've been talking about with clean air.
Thank you. Yeah, the question for anyone over there that couldn't hear it is about a particular bill right now that I think is called the Carbon Dividend Act. The idea is this: the people who are pushing this particular bill want to impose a tax on carbon. I think they want to do it mainly at the source. So the idea is you tax at the refineries, at the oil companies, the coal companies, the gas companies. But obviously, they would pass that on to consumers, would pay a little more at the pump, that type of thing. And then what they would do is the money that's collected from the carbon tax, they would actually return it to the American people in the form of annual dividends or checks. So you would start getting money in the mail that you didn't get before that would be generated by this carbon tax. The interesting thing about that proposal is that there are lots of large companies, including fossil fuel companies, that are starting to favor it. They haven't favored this particular bill, but there are some companies like Shell that's coming in here to Beaver County, and Exxon and Exelon, who have all said they think that we should tax carbon. The idea being that companies that burn a lot of carbon are putting pollution into our atmosphere and carbon into our atmosphere that is causing the climate to change. And companies that produce clean energy don't really get a break or a deal on price, even though they're sort of doing us all a favor by not producing any pollution. And so a tax could make up the difference between those two things. It could help consumers like us be able to choose clean forms of energy. And it might help set the balance and lead us to a future where we're not emitting as much carbon and maybe be able to prevent some of the really catastrophic things that could come from climate change. So it's a very good and interesting overall idea. The questions that I have about it are the effect that it will have on jobs here in Western Pennsylvania, and who will pay the cost and how much of an idea like this. And that's something that's pretty complex. It's really not written into the legislation itself. So like I said, I value regular order. I value the process the way it's supposed to work. And the way it's supposed to work in Washington with new bills like this, and this was just introduced, is that it'll start off in a committee, not my committee, but it'll start off in one of the other ones. They'll bring in some experts, they'll hold hearings, members of that committee will change the legislation, they'll vote on it. If it gets out of the committee, eventually it'll get all the way down to the floor of the full House. We'll have a chance to really consider it, listen to what all those experts say, and then go from there. And at that point, I'd be in a better position to know, is it going to cost us jobs here in Western Pennsylvania? If it costs us jobs, is it going to help us create any new jobs? That's what we really need to know. So I'm all for aggressive action when it comes to doing what we need to do to save our planet, but we have to make sure people are working. We have to make sure they're earning a paycheck here first. And we can do both. We can design solutions that make sure that those who are most able to pay and who are most able to carry the burden of this actually carry it, and that it doesn't fall on the middle class like a lot of the things we've done in the past.
Are you talking about the Green Deal then?
I'm not talking about the Green Deal. We're actually talking about one specific bill that came first.
Well, where do you stand on the Green Deal?
Where do I stand on the Green Deal? You know, this climate change, the threat that it's going to pose to me, my kids, my grandkids, to our country, is, I believe, far too serious of a threat and far too serious of an issue to be dealt with lightly. And so I didn't see very many look, I'm a team player. It takes a lot of people to pass a bill down in Washington, D.C., so you know, I'm not really interested in getting into name calling, or are you for it or against it. It doesn't actually really propose anything concrete. So what I'm focused on in my lane is, how do we direct research and evidence and gathering evidence toward the solutions that will actually work. Here's one example. Right here in Beaver County, we have the Beaver Valley Nuclear Power Station. It's owned by First Energy. They're in a little bit of financial trouble. They're in bankruptcy, in fact, and they're saying that they're going to have to close in 2 or 3 years if they don't get better treatment under the law. There's 1,000 people that work there. The Southside Beaver School District could possibly go under if that place closes and all those family-sustaining jobs are wiped out. Huge percentage of veterans work there. Thousands of union tradesmen go in there twice a year to do the required maintenance. It's a great thing for this area, and guess what? It emits no carbon. It is one of the best clean energy sources we've ever come up with. It's an American success story. You know, in the run-up to World War II, we knew that we needed to figure out nuclear energy and fast before the Germans did, and it spawned you know, an entire industry that created jobs and took care of families and helped power this country. We still get 1/5 of our power in the United States from nuclear energy. Those are the kind of things we need to be investing in. I didn't see a word about that in the Green New Deal proposal. So that's what I'm interested in, things that we know will work. They'll take a little time. They'll take a lot of work for us in Washington. I know we can do it. Sir, in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. I'm a 31-year Pennsylvania social studies educator, and with the graduates who come back to me, they go to trade school, they go to college. Their biggest problem is underemployment and student debt. Is there something the federal government can do to restructure the student debt? Banks will do it, but banks are predatory. Banks make a profit. They're federal student loans. I have a kid came to me, he's 25 years old, went 4 years of college, got a degree in mathematics, can't get a job locally. His student loans are going to be $1,400 a month. That's more than a car payment. That's more than a house payment. $1,400 a month. When he did the right thing, you know, go to math and science, STEM education. He can't afford to move out of the area. His parents can't get him to move out of the area. The jobs are. What do we do for these kids? That's a problem with young people.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this is a huge problem. Yes, it's weighing down my entire generation. And yes, there is something we can do about it. So roughly, it kind of helps to get a sense of what are the size of these different things we're talking about in terms of actual dollars, so we know how hard is it for us to address them. The size of student debt in this country is somewhere around $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion total. I know that sounds big, but it's nothing compared to most private debt, to mortgage debt, to the types of debt that we have out there that banks really rely on for their business. So that actually makes it a solvable problem. I mean, you know, in about a little over a year ago, when the president had the big tax cut that he was very proud of and they passed, that involved about $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion of tax breaks, mainly for corporations and the very wealthy, right there in one fell swoop. So that's the entire size of the student debt problem in this country, is somewhere roughly equivalent to the size of that. set of tax breaks that the president passed. So, not to say we would wipe off all student debt with that kind of expenditure or give it away for free. I don't believe in that. But we have had some great programs over the years that help relieve people's student debt in exchange for public service. Those programs are being cut or nearly eliminated. So, just think about me as an example. When I came out of law school, my first job was to sign up for the Marines and become an officer, to engage in public service, right? Well, at that time, they had a program on the books that said if you did public service like that, whether in the government or in a nonprofit agency like a social services agency, or any of these types of places, the Peace Corps, any of these programs, if you did that over the course of about 10 years and you paid what you owed the whole time, and they would hold it down to relative to your income, about 10% of your income. If you made those payments for 10 years, they would forgive the balance of your debt. Well, I was one of the first classes to come due on that. It started 2008, 2009, so here in 2018, 2019, the first 10-year period is in. You know how many people have collected on having their student loans forgiven? Less than 1%. Less than 1% of all people that are eligible, and that's because it's been underfunded, and over time they keep changing the rules so that it's almost impossible to keep track of whether you're eligible. I'm a member of Congress, and I couldn't tell you how many of my payments counted toward that 10 years. I'm sure that most of them didn't. They make the rules too tricky and convoluted. If you've ever sat on a phone line and been put on hold 4 different times for over an hour for anything in your life, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Contracts that are too small and difficult to read. It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, it really doesn't. We could have a program where you go from 10 years down to 5 years, and you have a mobile app on your cell phone that tells you each month with a check mark whether your payment counted and whether you're still in compliance. And by the way, don't we need a few more police officers in some of these small towns out here? Don't we need more people to join the military? Don't we need people doing drug and alcohol rehabilitation for the people who are infected with the opioid epidemic? I mean, we have some real needs in the area of core public service. And we're not asking anybody to get anything for free. We want them to work for it. But we need a call to service like this, and we could use this moment to do it. Sir, go ahead.
Okay, that's it, Bob. I'm a councilman here in Baden, okay? 40 years, okay?
Yes, 40 years.
We have one full-time policeman on duty. We have 4,700 people in this town. We can't afford to get full-time policemen. We can't even afford to get part-timers anymore. They won't stay. They won't stay for the money. It costs you $900 to dress a policeman. They stay 2 weeks or a month. They go to the next town where they get $1 more. You can't keep up with it. We have 4,700 people in this town. We have one full-time policeman, that's the chief. He works steady daylight. We have one on 311 and one on 11 and 7. That's bad. 2 towns down below, they got 3 and 4. We just can't get it.
That's exactly what I've heard so many places. That's what I'm talking about. And the places that can hire part-time officers are paying guys around my age or even younger $14 or $15 an hour, no health care,
right,
to put their lives on the line and to work in 2 or 3 different departments at once. I mean, it doesn't reflect the value of what they do. We owe them more than that. So student debt is what we can do in the federal level, and I think a lot of our state and county counterparts could kick in as well. There's a lot we need to work on.
There are places in the county, they can afford to have more people in the town.
That's right.
But you take a town like Baden, or Conor and Ambridge, they're low paid. You can't keep officers. They're going to go someplace else.
Yeah. Meanwhile, these are the kind of places we need them the most. I mean, the wealthy communities that can afford to pay all these officers, they often are pretty safe too. So I don't blame them for doing that. But we need to do something to make sure that these places can hire more officers.
It's tough. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for coming to our town.
We'll go here first and then work our way back. Go ahead, man.
The Lymphedema Treatment Act was recently introduced into the Senate. It will be going to the House. We need that act to be passed. It was first introduced in 2015. It is for those that have the primary and secondary lymphedema from having cancer, breast cancer, or some other type of problem that causes the swelling. And the Medicare does not pay for the apparatus that you need, the pumps, the sleeves, anything. And we need this help.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll make sure when it is on its way to the House, we take a look at it right away. I
It's
can
right
promise you
in the
that.
Senate now. I got a notice this morning.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Why don't we go here and then?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
When you request a panel of experts to come in to a group in DC to make a decision on a particular, be it energy or whatever it may be, how can you be sure that expert is not a lobbyist?
Good question. When we bring in experts to testify before us or give us advice on something, how can we be sure that they're not a lobbyist? Lobbyists are required to register with the federal government if they're going to engage in the practice of lobbying. So if anyone was engaged in lobbying somehow and didn't register, they would get caught pretty quick, because DC is a pretty small town when you come down to it, and people would know. So we would just make sure that those people are not registered lobbyists. We almost always, at least on the committees that I'm on energy, we almost always choose people who are PhD scientists and work at universities, or think tanks, that kind of thing. Maybe some in industry. They're not really lobbyists. And my other committee is the Veterans Committee. We usually have people from the VA itself, and also from our excellent veteran service organizations like here in the American Legion. They make sure they come in and give us the information we need. Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Ethan Winter, and I call you often. Sorry about that. But,
I've heard good things about you, Ethan. I have. Yeah.
Speak up. Sorry.
Please.
So,
I'll make sure I repeat the question too.
yeah, sorry. So we've heard a lot about infrastructure tonight. We've heard a lot about jobs. For instance, the social studies teacher in the corner, police officers. We've also heard a lot of questions about the environment. What would you need to see from the Green New Deal that would cover that in a way that you'd support it? The Green New Deal addresses all three of those issues. It's a massive restructuring of infrastructure. It's a massive overhaul of our energy system. I'm fine with nuclear. It doesn't bother me. Nuclear is a clean energy source. It doesn't bother me at all. What do you need to see to make that something that we pull the trigger on? Because the last time we saw legislation as aggressive, well, not aggressive, as bold as this was the original New Deal. And it uplifted the middle class for the next, 30 years? It was giant. What would you need to see to make this happen?
I would need to see more than a few pages, that's for sure. And the original New Deal was a whole series of bills that were passed over a pretty long time to address a major and specific crisis. It didn't really try to solve every problem that society was facing in one fell swoop. What it did was it looked at particular areas of the economy that were struggling after the Depression and said, how can we fix things in the Tennessee Valley? We're going to make a Tennessee Valley Authority, and we're going to make sure that they get electric power, and these are the people we're going to hire to work here, and here's how much it's going to cost, and most importantly, here's how we're going to pay for it. So I think those are the answers that we owe the American people. We're coming from the same place with the same heart here. I think we identify the challenge that's ahead. All I'm saying is, changing the way that the energy grid works and changing the sources of fuel that we use to power the lives that we all live is a major undertaking. I mean, humanity has really never faced something like this before, something this big, something that's this expensive and involves this many jobs. And I'm pretty sure almost all of us drove here tonight in a car that runs on fossil fuel, right? And we're going to go home and our houses are going to be hot on a cold night like this because of energy largely that we get from natural gas and a couple other sources. So we are really tied into the way things are now. And it's not going to change overnight. But if we make the right investments, in research and we push for some breakthroughs and we work with these companies that really want to do things the right way and do things a little bit differently, we all share this challenge. We can do it, but it's going to take quite a while, and it's going to take a large number of bills over a long period of time. And we're going to have to take some small steps and see how it works and make sure that we didn't hurt too many people along the way and that we're actually getting it right, and then take a few more. That's how our system was designed to work, and I think it has gotten us this far. It will take us further as well. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you talk about bringing in experts, are you reaching out to other countries like Northern European countries, Norway, or even Germany? A lot of these countries, they're smaller. That's probably easier to do, but many of them are going carbon neutral fairly soon. So are we able to bring in any kind of expertise from those places that might inform our decision-making process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's about when we bring in experts, particularly on energy, are we able to look overseas for people with knowledge as well? The answer is yes. In my particular case, we just came into the majority a little over a month ago, so it's the first time I've been in the situation where I get to have some role in who we bring to these hearings that we have. And you know, I'm a pretty junior guy at that, so I don't always get to be the one making the decision. But yeah, it's great. It's a great example that you mentioned about Europe and energy and going carbon neutral. Because actually, back to my point about nuclear power and how important I think it is. You actually see in Europe that some countries went down different roads. So you saw certain countries like in Scandinavia, and France is another one. They invested really heavily in nuclear power to the point where they get almost the majority of their energy from that. You've seen other countries like Germany that invested more in wind and solar, and they helped make some good advances there, but they've never really been able to break through to a large, affordable majority of their power base the way the countries in nuclear did. So we've learned some things from Europe, and hopefully we will draw on that experience going forward. Sir, go ahead.
I'm Paul O'Connor. Quickly, 15 years ago, people used to call people at dinner time and basically do advertising. So then the federal government came up with a call list, or through the FE, through the Federal Communication, that you basically got on the do not call list. Okay. So then, in the last 5 years, people have started getting a lot of spam calls, a lot of spam. So then the different internet providers said, well, we'll set up this website so you can register, so do not spam. Okay. Over the years now, as far as when you look at the amount of robocalls that come in each day, on both of my phones, I get at least 3 to 4 robocalls a day.
I do too.
And then as far as on my spam, I get at least 50 spam per day. So what is the federal government doing about that?
What's the federal government doing about it? Yeah, so.
And I know it's affecting all of us.
We get this question a lot, and I actually got it a lot when I was working in federal law enforcement too. So the problem is that if you were able to ever trace back the source of all these spam and robocalls, they basically all come from overseas, and they come from places that are difficult for us to touch, places like Nigeria and Eastern Europe. And it's all computerized at this point. It's not really a person sitting there, dialing your number specifically. So it's very, very difficult for us to counteract. And if there was a way to do it and to wipe those off your phone, I would do it in a heartbeat. I just haven't seen anyone figure that out yet. But if you know something I don't, please let me know. Ma'am, go ahead.
Clearly, the climate in Washington is changing now that we have all of these female Democrats in Congress. Speaking about a positive impact, and I know this probably is not going to happen in my lifetime, but do you ever see term limits for Congress, Senate, and especially the Supreme Court? Do you see that ever happening? Do you guys talk about it at all in Washington? Because I know we all talk about it here.
Sure.
All the time. Do you ever talk about that?
Question is about term limits for Congress, the Senate, Supreme Court. We do talk about it. People are of different minds about it. Many of the younger folks like me are totally open to it. No surprise, many of the older folks are not. I'll tell you though, what I am a little more concerned about than term limits. I am concerned about those. I believe the best and most effective and most important term limit is a competitive election. We have too many places in this country where the election is basically an afterthought because the district has been gerrymandered and or because money plays such a big role that whoever the incumbent is just able to raise so much money so easily that it's really difficult for anyone to challenge them. Those are two things we can fix, and those are two things we talk about all the time. And I think here in Pennsylvania, we actually have a great lesson to teach the rest of the country about what happens when you redraw district lines in something of a fair manner. We now ended up with a congressional delegation that's 9 Democrats and 9 Republicans. It basically reflects the fact that we're a swing state. We're a state that has gone both ways in presidential elections. We have 1 Republican senator, 1 Democratic senator. So this should be a pretty neutral and even state. But before, we only had 5 Democrats in Congress, and we had 13 Republicans. And the shape of those districts was pretty strange. It's not that much better looking now, but it's a little bit better looking. And I know my the area that I have to drive through is a little smaller than it was before. The district is a little more compact. So I think that's the best thing. If you have to face the voters every 2 years with a real challenge and have a real debate in person, and especially if we ever get to the point where money is not the biggest factor, where we can limit the amount of money in these elections, those two things will go a long way. And we can talk about term limits after that. I'm more than happy to. But I also think if somebody is good enough to keep winning a competitive election year after year, new guys like me do get the benefit of having some people in Congress who've been there a while and really know their stuff. And there are some there who work as hard today as they did the first day they got there and are very valuable. So I'd like to see the competitiveness of the elections improve first. Sir, go ahead.
I had a follow-up about the student debt question. My name is Chris Leininger. I'm a professor up at Slippery Rock University. I'm finishing my PhD down at Carnegie Mellon. And for my undergraduate time period, it's been a period of time, I figure I've spent about $60,000 back towards the loans I borrowed. It's even more than my initial undergraduate need for money. And because I'm on an income-based repayment, none of that money goes towards the capital. So I'm paying interest for 20, 30 years, and the capital debt's never going down. How is that legal, number one? Because I'm making payments, I'm happy to make the payments, but it's gotta be something I can afford to do. And I appreciate the opportunity to have access to education because it's critical for our children to be able to improve themselves and move ahead. But it's such a catch-22 that it becomes such a burden that you really can't do anything else in terms of progressing with your life. So, is there something specifically? I know in Pennsylvania, there's several other states that have taken Navient on. That's where my student loans are at. And then the other part of that is the consolidation. You talked about this. If you work 10 years for a nonprofit or a public agency, you can get forgiveness. My wife and I combined our loans. She's worked for almost 20 years for the county, but we can't get qualification for getting rid of that debt based on public service because it was a combined loan and it's in my name.
Right.
So it just seems like such a catch-22. How do you ever get out from underneath of it? At this point, I think I'm going to die owing student loan money debt, but I hope it doesn't go to my son, and I'm just going to make minimum payments until I'm no longer alive. So is there any way to get ahead of that? What's really specifically being done to address this kind of usury by these predatory agencies? And in my estimation, the federal government should be managing federal loans instead of letting it be outsourced to private companies that are only looking to capitalize their bottom line. That's
my comment. Give them a round of applause. I think you basically just answered your question. This is our money. These are our loans. The federal government is the bank here. We have allowed this whole network of other people to form up around it and make money off of it. I mean, who's really being rewarded in the way that we finance student loans at this point in our country? It's debt collection agencies, loan servicers, banks, and the universities themselves. It's not the students. It is not the students these days. That shows that we're wrong, right? So we should be changing these rules. Why can't you refinance your loans to get a more competitive interest rate the way that you can with your home mortgage?
And if you make a mistake or get behind, you're penalized on your credit score. So
absolutely, yeah.
You can't even make more money.
You end up, I mean, Tennessee Ernie Ford wrote the song, what, 50 years ago? 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't call me because I can't go. Right? You won't be allowed to die until you pay off those student loans. You know, we've had this problem with us for a long time, and we've let it get worse and worse and worse. And I think we're hitting the bottom now. So we are going to be doing everything we can to change these rules, make them looser, get the public service repayment times down. That's the first time I've heard of the situation of the combined loan, so I can make sure we look at that, whether there's a way to fit that in. But just remember what I told you. We can afford to fix this. We can afford to have the federal government actually act like a bank on behalf of its own people instead of on behalf of all these other entities. We just have to do it.
As a rookie congressman, and you're fired up, ready to go, you're a Marine, rock. Okay. Back to what we were saying a little bit ago about the term limits. You have people there that have been there so long that have lost touch with what's going on because they're in their little castle. And sometimes you feel like the Democrats and Republicans are so far left and so far right, okay, that you don't realize where we're at, okay, and every great nation is fallen. We're fallen. We are falling. You look at all this stuff that, not so much you, but, you know, some of the other Congresses and Senates have passed. Do you think anybody in the House has the Affordable Care Act?
Oh, yeah, we do. We actually have to now.
You have
So,
to?
the newer
Okay,
members.
so the philosophy...
Yeah, we have to buy our health care on the DC Obamacare exchange. But to your point, only if you've been there since the law was passed in 2010. So if you were there before,
Okay,
you still
so
get whatever the health care
if you
was.
pass a law, you live with it.
Exactly.
If you can't live with it, don't give it to me. I didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We elected you to represent us.
You're exactly right.
But if you're going to pass these laws, you know, and just like the gentleman was talking about the Second Amendment, I'm a gun owner. I have a lot of guns. I can go in any store, anytime, put my driver's license and my visa down, and I'll take one of everything. And they're going to give it to me. But there was just that Chicago shooting where they said that the guy shouldn't have had a gun. What's the big hang up with expanded background checks? There was a guy at work that went to a gun store in Ohio, wanted to buy a pistol. Picks up the pistol, da-da-da-da-da, hands him his driver's license, fill out the form. Sorry, sir, we can't give you the gun. Why not? You've been denied. What do you mean I've been denied? He says, you've been denied. We don't know why. You got to check and come back. Well, come to find out, he had a DUI in his past that was 3 times over the limit. Automatically denies you. Okay, so in the day and age of computers and smartphones and all this other stuff, why can't you tie in mental health background checks, all this other stuff? Don't have to say why. Mr. Lamb goes in and tries to buy a pistol, but you've been committed for something. Bah, 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 bah. Sorry, sir, we can't sell you the pistol. We can't sell you the rifle. Not that you can't get it in some street somewhere by somebody that's unregistered with no serial number. You know, but why is it such a battle? You know, it shouldn't be a battle. Tie everything together, do the background check. If you pass, take one of every flavor. If you got the money, buy one of every flavor.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and it really, I worked very closely with the background check system as a prosecutor. You know, when people like that would get denied, that would be forwarded to law enforcement, and eventually it could make its way to someone like me just to check out and find out what's going on. Unfortunately, one of the problems we have across this country is we let 50 different states do their things 50 different ways. In a lot of states, when that happens, when someone gets denied at the counter, there's a 3-day waiting period that kicks in which law enforcement is allowed to investigate that, to find out why the person was denied. And it could be for all kind of legitimate reasons. It turned out your friend actually had a disqualifying case. But a lot of times what happens is the court records are incomplete. And you can see that a person was charged with something, but you can't see whether they were convicted. Or you can see that they were convicted of some general offense like assault or something, but you really don't know if that means like, they stared at someone the wrong way or they actually punched them or, who knows what. But in a lot of states, they give you 3 days to figure that out on the cops. And if the cops don't get to it, tie goes to the buyer and they get to buy it even if they were actually disqualified. That happened in South Carolina when Dylan Roof shot up people in that church in Charleston. He waited the 3 days after being flagged while trying to buy that AR-15, and he was ended up able to buy it because the rule said 3 days and it goes to you. Law enforcement just wasn't able to get to it. Now here in Pennsylvania, that waiting period would have been longer, and the background check system here is actually much more complete. And the reason for that is that Pennsylvania applied to some grants from the Federal Department of Justice and said, we want to build a better background check system for our state. We want to clean up the court records that come from all these different counties. We want to collect the mental health records that are allowed under law to be in the system. We want to make sure they're complete. We want our gun store clerks to be able to see this thing the first time and stop before it starts. We still don't have a perfect system here in Pennsylvania, but we probably would have caught Dylan Roof. And so if we were able to make that kind of investment everywhere around the country and expand on it and strengthen it and actually make use of 21st century technologies, we go a long way. We're just getting started on that right now. We're about to introduce and pass a bill in the House called H.R. 8 that is going to strengthen the background check system. It's going to provide more money for this kind of thing. We're going to have a fight on our hands in the Senate to try to get it passed, but just like you, most veterans I meet, most gun owners I meet, think it's fair that everybody should basically have to pass the same background check just like they did.
Why should it be a fight in the Senate?
Well, you'll have to ask some of your senators that, I think.
Yeah, just because it's the Republicans, I mean, this is something for everybody.
I agree.
This isn't a Democrat or Republican issue.
I agree. For a very long time, the gun lobby has opposed changes in the background check system that have meant we haven't even really had this discussion. There's a lot more we can go into there, but it's a new day. I think people are looking at this with new eyes a little bit more honestly, and we will finally have the debate about whether we can improve this background check system and how that will make people safer. So thank you for asking the question. Sir, go ahead.
I'm Marty Morris, Big Beaver, and I want to head in a little different direction, and that is the future. I'm 74, and I've lived a good life. I'm still living a good life, but I'm concerned about my grandkids, what world we're leaving for them. And my concern is based on a number of factors, because every day we see things that are going in the wrong direction. And if you follow that trend, things are going to go downhill, and the further you go downhill, the more difficult it's going to be to get back up again. And I'll give you some specific examples. One is standard of living. The statistics show that today, the young generation today will be the first generation since World War II whose standard of living has gone down from their parents. Since World War II, the parents always expected and enjoyed seeing their children do better. That's starting to reverse now. Secondly, we're talking about climate change. I remember in the 70s, President Carter did a lot of things and proposed things to help the energy problem, which of course exacerbates climate change. And during the last 50 years, we learned a lot. So I'm not really happy to hear answers that all we can do are incremental changes because it's a small problem. In fact, over 90% of the world scientists now say that the point of no return is 2030, just 12 years from now, which means the point when we have to start decreasing our carbon emissions on a worldwide basis. But our country has been walking away from worldwide treaties for that purpose. The second example is our relationship with our partners around the world. We're getting out of treaties. It was really embarrassing last week when Vice President Pence and Baden were at the meeting in Europe. And when the Vice President spoke, he just dead silence. And when Biden stood up and privately with other world leaders, that's being reported now, and said, don't worry, the United States is going to be pulling around again, and we're going to be on the same road with you again. They were happy to hear it, but they didn't really believe it. They said to Biden that, well, things are going south so fast, how are we going to establish America as the world leader again? And I could just go on and on and on about things that are really a problem brewing for our children and our grandchildren. And I know in any job, and that's your job, people look at today. There's problems we have to solve today. People are waiting in line. Companies and stockholders want profits today. They don't want to say, well, we're investing for the future. Well, we want our representatives and senators to invest for the future. And I really don't expect an answer from you today, because that is really a big project. Think about the New Deal and the Green Deal. This is even bigger, and the time is even less.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I mean, he's right. It's true that we really have never faced anything like this as a society before, something with this kind of ticking clock, where we have to change the way we do things by a certain point, or else it's going to get a lot worse real fast. And that, the more carbon we put into the atmosphere, the more the ice is going to melt, the more some of these things are going to feed back on each other, and we're going to be in real trouble. And that's going to happen in my lifetime. So when I talk about incremental changes, I don't mean doing small, meaningless things. I don't mean making tiny little steps just to say that we're doing them. I mean that we have built a system of government in this country that is the envy of the world in a lot of ways. Not every day, but in general it is. Because we have been careful to balance all the interests and make sure that no one sort of tyrant or person who holds power is able to emerge. We separate and spread out the power that we have. And we are capable of doing great things within that system. I mean, sometimes people compare what we need to do now to the moonshot, right? Well, the moonshot was not a casual effort. It was not just sort of written down on a few pieces of paper and then came to itself. That was a decade of dedicated scientific research on one single problem. And we got there. The same thing happened 20 years before that when we needed to figure out nuclear energy. We dedicated the best and the brightest to it over a period of time, and we gave them what they needed, and they did it. And we've come through like that time and again in this country. So we will do it again. We will do it again. I know that we will. But it's going to take a whole of government effort. It's going to take us working together with private industry. It's very complex. But guess what? You know who has no fogginess or no hesitation about what's going to come in the future? China. So you want to talk about our position in the world and what other countries think of us? They are still looking to us for leadership because everybody can see that China wants to dominate the solar panel industry. They want to dominate the electric car industry. They want to dominate AI and robotics and the things that are going to create jobs in the future. I want us to have those jobs. I want those industries to be dominated by American companies like many of these things were in the past. I want nuclear energy to be dominated by American companies like Westinghouse here in Western Pennsylvania, again, and not Chinese and Russian companies. So it isn't just about the environment, it's also about the jobs that we know are going to exist in the future. And we are playing on a world stage against a tougher competitor than we have ever faced. But we've done it before, we'll do it again, but it's going to be about putting all these people together for the national security of our country. And it's not going to be done overnight, but it's at the top of our agenda. Make no mistake about that.
I forgot one important point for the future. May I mention that?
Sure.
And that's nuclear disarmament. I remember in the 50s as a school kid, we had air raid drills and we had to hide under go down in the cellar. And fast forward to Reagan's area, we had the great nuclear disarmament bill. At that time, the clock that was being watched, we were in the 11th hour for destruction of the world due to the probability of nuclear action. And since Reagan passed that bill, people forgot about that threat. Are we headed to that threat again now that the treaty with Russia has been ripped up?
It's out there, but these treaties can be made again, and they can be made again to work in our interests, and that's something that's lying out there ahead of us. Sir, go ahead.
With China, but especially Russia in mind, what's being done to guarantee the integrity of our election to make it free from foreign influence? I know there was supposed to monitor that in understaffed, underfunded.
Absolutely.
And our president has no desire.
Questions about what's being done to secure the integrity of our elections, especially coming into 2020. So every Congress, you get to pick a bill as the majority. It's going to be your first bill. We call it HR 1 for House of Representatives 1. It's supposed to convey what your highest priority is. This year, the Democrats chose as HR 1 a bill to guarantee our election security, or at least improve it, to help fix our campaign finance system, to do a lot of things to end gerrymandering, to do a lot of things that will fix and strengthen our democracy, things that are not partisan in nature, but just try to take power from the hands of whether it's Russians trying to interfere with us, or large corporations trying to buy the elections, or wealthy donors of both liberal and conservative varieties trying to buy the elections, or politicians who are Democrats and Republicans trying to gerrymander their districts. We're going to push back against all of that in this one big bill. And we're going to spend a lot of time and energy trying to pass it. But one of the things that it does is it greatly increases the funding for election machines and election systems around this country, and it requires the best thing we could possibly have, the least technologically sophisticated or complicated thing we could possibly have, which is a paper backup of every vote. We want to put that in. Okay. Go ahead, ma'am.
I know you talked about how it takes a long time to secure what you're looking for as Congress, the Senate, and the President. And we've been working on healthcare bills, and I'm only in my 50s, so I can remember back as Clinton. Really focusing on trying to figure out how to make healthcare not only affordable, but available to everyone. Right now, it's like if you don't get healthcare, you don't have a good job, you get some, but you're gonna be denied all your medicine because you can't afford it. You can't have that operation because it's not covered. You can't take this medicine. I mean, it's ridiculous. Every other major country in the world can have access for healthcare for everyone. Why can't we?
Every other country in the world can have access to health care for everyone. Why can't we? There's always trade-offs. Every country is a little bit different. So in the United States, we have an employer-based system of health care, largely because after World War II, that was the one we chose. And other countries got to start over on a blank slate. You know, England had its infrastructure and its healthcare system largely wiped out by the bombing in World War II, so they got to start over and redesign things from scratch. And they ended up with a national health service that they're pretty proud of, although they do ration the amount of care that you can get, and often you have to wait pretty long for the appointment that you want, which can be a little different than this country. I think if we were starting everything over in our healthcare system again, people would probably have different ideas about how we would guarantee healthcare for everybody. But that's not what we're doing. We've come into this movie halfway through, and we're trying to make sure there's a good ending for the most number of people that we can have. So I think the Affordable Care Act was a good step in the right direction. Definitely wasn't perfect. Didn't work well in a lot of places. You know, in a lot of places, not very many insurance companies actually entered the exchanges to sell to people because the dollar and cents weren't really working. But our friends on the other side of the aisle wanted to repeal that and replace it with nothing. And leave nothing in its place, which I didn't think was a good idea either. So there's some pretty good ideas out there about how we can keep moving the ball down the field on healthcare with the same goal that we all share of making sure everybody has a chance to be covered. And so some of those ideas include maybe lowering the Medicare age from 65 and letting people pay their own way into it. Yes. Again, that's something that we need to see the economics on, but it has some promise. Other ideas that are out there are strengthening the exchanges themselves by putting some money in a backup insurance pool so that it's not as risky for the insurance companies to enter. I think that's a decent idea. Some people have talked about what they call a public option, which means the government would basically just create a competitor for health insurance that people could choose if they wanted to, and it might affect the behavior of these insurance companies. There's a lot of options for us out there, and we've put some rules on insurance companies too that said, you know, for preventive health measures, you got to cover these 66 things, or I forget how many there are in the Affordable Care Act, but we could do a little more there too. We could make sure more preventive health treatment is covered, because really, if you want to control costs long term, that's what we need to do. Is we need to get people care early, detect things early before they become more expensive and cost the rest of us a lot of money. So it's a place that we can keep getting some wins, I think. And you know, we've talked a lot about prescription drugs too, but that's kind of at the top of the heap for me of things that we need to fix. So, sir, all the way in the back.
The last Congress, I believe 124 Democrats signed on to the H.R. 676, the Congress single payer bill. I believe that a successor bill will be introduced into the House of Representatives in the next couple of weeks for single payer health care. I know that you do not support the Congress bill, you did not sign on to it. Will you sign on to the upcoming bill that will be introduced?
Yeah, the question's about a bill in the House for Medicare for all or universal health coverage, single payer. I had not signed on to that bill previously because it was a very short bill with no numbers in it. It had no credible explanation of how we would pay for a government-run healthcare system that would cover everybody. The size of the healthcare economy in the United States, like the amount we spend overall on healthcare every year as a country, private, government, everything included, is somewhere between $3 and $4 trillion. It's actually almost the exact same size as the federal budget itself. That's about how much we spend through the government every year. So if we were just do some sort of simple calculations here, if we were going to take all of healthcare and put it into the government, we would almost double our federal budget in a single year, right? And now there are those who say, well, that's okay because you wouldn't have to pay premiums anymore. You would pay it all in taxes. But the problem is these bills that are out there don't really do the number crunching of exactly how that would work out. And they don't always answer questions like, would you get to keep the doctor that you have right now through your private insurance company? If you really like your doctor at the hospital that you always go to or the office you always go to, if it's all brought on government control, would you be guaranteed to keep that person? If the new government system says you never have to pay a copay or you never have to pay a deductible or share any type of the cost, what if people start using a lot more healthcare than they are now and the costs actually go up? And so that it costs more than your premiums covered before. These are questions that I don't know the answer to right now, but I know that for me to sign on to a piece of legislation that would change healthcare so dramatically in this country and threaten so many people who work in the healthcare industry right now as their job, we got to have some clarity on it. And so we need to take our time answering those questions. In my mind, that's what improving the Affordable Care Act allows us to do. Maybe then, rather than change the whole thing in one fell swoop, if you change the Medicare age by a couple of years, you could see how that works and how much does it cost us in the budget every year. And, or if you had a public option, you could see, is that actually attractive to people? Do people want to come and take government-provided health care over what they have now? These are all things that we can try, and I think we can do that in a way that is actually cautious and a good use of the offices that we hold. Oh, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to bring up, our infrastructure's in very bad shape in our country. Our locks and dams down here are, well, about 100 years old. Water lines, bridges, everything's like ancient and decrepit and falling apart. And it's like a two-part thing. It's like we have a little bit of our priorities, like where we're spending our money. And don't take me wrong, my family fought in the Revolutionary War. Our deed was signed by George Washington, fought in every other war. I'm not anti-military or anything. But there was supposed to be a balance of power between, the Congress was supposed to approve that this is a major, major decision to go to war. And we didn't heed what Eisenhower said about it. And I just got a copy of last issue of Smithsonian Institute magazine. Even Congress doesn't know how much we did military action on this war on terror for 17, 18 years in 80 different countries. They had a map of Africa and Asia where all the different things were. It's a perpetual war. This was what brought down the Roman Empire. When you can't take care of what you have here, and we're $1.7 trillion. Over the last, it's not just when President Bush declared war on terror, there was an unlimited, you can go anywhere and do anything, and Congress didn't have much to do with that. Now, somewhere we're putting too much power in the president, and Congress doesn't have much say in things. When they had those 4 guys killed in the middle of Africa, most of the congressmen said, I didn't even know we had anyone over there. So we're losing control. I'm not anti-military, we need to, but is it legitimate? How long is this thing going to go on? When are we going to say enough is enough? Just because we call someone a terrorist legitimizes our use of military force. I don't think we're going to make friends that way. So I don't know how we can get there to be more of a balance in our government the way that it was supposed to be, instead of just declare anything so that's in national security.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, and it's a tough situation that we're in right now, because I agree with you. We've definitely made some military expenditures in this generation that might not have been the best idea, but we face some really serious and unprecedented challenges ahead too on the international stage. I mean, we're gonna have to figure out a lot when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to nuclear security. We are still facing very serious terrorist threats from ISIS in many different parts of the world where we're going to have to be present in some way. So we're trying to get the balance right, I guarantee you that. You started off by talking about infrastructure. All I'll say about that is there are ways that we can finance infrastructure that are different from the way we normally do the rest of our federal budget. So I like to say that we should think about infrastructure the way you think about a home purchase. You don't pay for the entire thing at once. There's actually an entire public finance industry out there that is geared to figure out how to pay for this over the useful life of a project, whether it's a bridge or a road or a lock or a dam or many other things. These things make money for our economy eventually, and if anyone in here has served on local government, on their local council or on their school board, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're able to finance new school buildings by doing bond issues and things like that. We can do that at the federal level too. We just need to put the will behind it.
I just want to make one statement, and I don't want to go on and on. Sure. How would we feel if China or Russia was dropping bombs from drones on 80 different countries around the world, we would be screaming that this is internationally violating all world law. But when we do it, it's justified because we said there's bad people out there. There's bad people machine gunning our kids in the schools. I mean, it's hypocritical is what it is.
Yeah, well, we're not China or Russia, so we may part ways on that one. But, next question. Ma'am, go ahead.
Yes, here you were talking about the election law, which you're going to try to have passed by the, I never heard anything about the voter ID. I want voter ID because I think there are elections, a lot of people in the United States who are not citizens of the United States. And I'm very glad that I'm a citizen and that's my right. So I think we should put in that bill for voter ID.
Everyone back there.
Gentleman over there's the lady.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
Jim, you are. I'm a retired school teacher. I have a question that just bugs me every day, and is we have our young generation out here, and they're coming out of colleges with $100,000 in debt, and then they go into the workforce, and then they're paying $600 to $800 a month for health care. I have a daughter, I gave her $3,000 to have a baby. It's unfair and it's corrupt. This healthcare system needs to be revamped because we're sending zillions of dollars to other countries of the world, and we're not helping our own people who are the middle class, who are working and doing everything. Something has to be done because we're just killing our young generation. And it has to go through, and maybe with some of the other people that are getting some of that, I'm not going to say like the things for welfare, food stamps, things like that. Maybe you need to bring back the public works program where, I know my dad did it. My dad had 6 children. He was out, he worked out at Tennessee Valley Authority, and that's where he was, and we didn't see him for many years. You know, so maybe they need to start thinking along those lines instead of giving everyone everything, that people need to work a little bit. There's too many people in the United States that want everything for free, and we're crushing the middle class.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm with you. That's where my focus is. I want to make sure that people can earn enough to provide for their families the way that generations did before us, and that is more and more under threat these days. I will say, you know, the amount that we spend on things like foreign aid or the amount that we spend on food stamps, it absolutely pales. It pales in comparison to the corporate welfare that we endorse in this country every single year. There is no comparison between what we allowed in that tax bill in 2017, what we allow with, you know, even someone like Warren Buffett, who's the first to admit this, but the tax breaks we allow him to have compared to average working Americans in the middle class. It's not right, and to me, that's where we look for the balance. That's where we are able to afford things like improving the Affordable Care Act, getting healthcare premiums down, allowing young people a shot at true public service jobs, which often come with good healthcare and good benefits. So I think our head's in the same place, but I just want to make sure we, you know, notice the size disparity between those two things that we're talking about. So
we're actually out of time.
We're getting out of time. If anybody had anything burning or you wanted to talk to me privately about it, or someone from my staff, catch us on the way out. Like I said, we do answer every phone call and every piece of mail as well. We'll be holding these, you know, pretty often, so just look for it. Thank you guys.